Welcome to Inside AI, the podcast where we bring you our unfiltered insights from people who are shaping AI programs. Today we have Jeroen Bulut. He is our leading consultant in artificial intelligence. He's currently working with the Australian Government Department of Health, Disability and Ageing, and he has over 20 years of experience across transformation and digital delivery. My name's Jan Esman. I lead up CTO Consulting's enterprise strategy consulting division, and I'm here to enjoy Jeroen's outlook on these kind of important questions for all of us. I wanted to say that you're hearing from Jan and Jeroen today. These are our opinions and our views, and not those necessarily the organisations we work for. So this is our conversation that we're sharing with you. Before we start, and Jeroen and I kind of talked about a really interesting perspective about AI. It feels like AI is creating the new race car, enormous amounts of power, great kind of possibilities in our future. But it seems as though everybody's more concerned about the brakes rather than the path ahead. And so today we wanted to tell you a little bit about what that looks like in terms of AI and the controls that are necessary, but at the same time, the reason why so often you hear about alignment and vision, because the tools that we are bringing to bear are not ones which respond well to brakes. So I think that's a really good metaphor, and hopefully that becomes a purposeful vehicle for this conversation. Hello, you're on. Please tell us what your overview about what you think about AI and the race car.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Love to talk about race cars. Might even be more interesting than AI, but we might do a little bit of both. I do use the race car analogy a lot because what I hear is people saying is, look, a race car is kind of a powerful engine, which is AI in the models, but clearly we need brakes as well. Otherwise, you kind of spin out of control. And then when we look at the brakes, what I see people do, and this is across some of the departments because I know quite a few people there, but also I think for instance, the banking sector or in the energy sector is they do focus on the brakes. They focus on the controls, and rightly so, right? No one will race a race car without brakes. What I do see though is because they try to design the brakes what I call relatively low in the organization, because there's a number of kind of frameworks, right? There's ISO standards, I think it's 42001, there's NIST, there's DTA standards for government, and they're quite detailed, and they tend to be taken by governance teams that design the controls literally one requirement at a time. So they tend to be quite low in an organization. The result of that is that we have many of them, or you see many in an organization, as well as some teams have the tendency to design the new controls. So I think that to me, it's always two things. A, yes, we need brakes, but we already had brakes before AI. So can you just reuse what you've got? So what makes AI specific that it is risky, therefore we need brakes, versus the car we used to have before the AI engine was sitting next to the normal engine, if that makes sense, or the non-AI engine. I think that's one thing they don't do. And then the AI brake specific pieces tend to be quite low in the organization.
And I think, especially in Australian government, there is that tension between risk, the risk of something bad happening, and the fallout of that, and the mission. That really important delivery of services and the ongoing challenges of to do more with less. I mean, AI kind of speaks to the opportunity of I'd like to deliver a lot more service, but it's clearly triggering the nervous system within an agency to respond to, oh my goodness, the risks could be huge, and the potential badness could be right around the corner
Yeah,
as well.
you kind of get a bit of both, right? So the opportunities are enormous, then therefore the risks of not getting it right all the time are significant as well. It's almost
Yeah.
you can only get the upside, well, you also have to be mindful of the potential downside.
I really liked your thoughts about the capabilities. That it feels like federal agencies have a lot of compute. They've got a lot of tools, but it feels like confidence is there what's holding them back. What does that look like on the ground?
So to me, the confidence construct, when I look at it, is to get people away from a control or assurance
Mm,
thinking, and because there's a lot of focus on AI governance, therefore people go, it's either risk, therefore we need to control it. But it's governance for a reason. Or there was a national press conference last week by a UTS professor and others, and I think he put it saying as well, there's kind of, we want the boom without the gloom, which is true, right? But the governance piece is kind of on the not gloom, but
mm,
preventing gloom from happening is only helpful if there is value, if there is a boom, if you will.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
will not achieve either of those things if the teams within an organization, including in departments, don't have the confidence to actually use it.
yeah.
So I think there's almost like three steps. So the first one is, and we'll go back to the race car analogy, I think, because there's more than brakes that we need, right? So the first one is what I call then transparency, and we'll talk about
Yes.
that. Then I think once after you've achieved transparency, you'll then need to have confidence on an organizational level. Teams need to have the confidence whilst you after the transparency piece, and then once you have the confidence piece, then I think you can start focusing on the boom side, not the gloom side, if that makes sense. So the actual value derived from AI. But I think it's in that order almost.
Yeah, and I like the way you think about the visibility of the track. So just dive a bit more into that transparency and visibility. And I'd like you to try to link it to those concepts of alignment. How do we actually manage that visibility to something productive?
So back to the race cars. So we have
Hmm.
a normal engine, we have an AI engine. That's all the technology pieces and the models and what a lot of people focusing on and lots of IT departments. Then we have brakes. Let's just reuse the brakes we have. We might tweak and change them for AI. And then I always say, well, that's awesome. So now the race car is finished. So now you're the racer. Before you start, I'm just going to blindfold you. How far do you think
Mm,
you can get? And you
mm.
probably get as far as the track you can remember in your head, and you go slow because you're not quite sure. So that's
Yeah,
what I mean by transparency.
and we're all blindfold me when I'm driving. I'm reaching for the brakes. I know.
Well, I think some
That's-
people will not even start, right?
yeah,
You go like,
yeah.
well, if I'm blindfolded and suddenly the world is black, I can't
Mm,
control these things because I can't
yeah,
see them. I can't see engine, I can't see brakes, but more importantly, I can't see the track in front of me. So
yeah,
in the physical world, that's saying is I need visibility. I think in the kind of organizational world, the saying is it will translate to I need transparency. I need to
yeah,
understand how to literally go from A to B. Or in AI terms, in business terms, it will be how to go from an idea into the realized value. So
yeah.
what is that use case management process? And then can you give me transparency on how that works?
Mm.
I think that's the
How do I
transparency
how do I
part.
know that I'm on the path to get to those objectives? So being able
Yeah,
to set the
and then
objectives,
bringing it back
yeah.
to alignment, I think then
Mm,
alignment is saying is if there is transparency on how that process might work, does
yeah,
everyone agree, aligned, that that is how it should work? And
yeah.
also the behaviors around it, if it doesn't work, how we correct it.
Mm,
Because that last part comes back to the confidence step, which is almost step two. Saying is, let's say we have transparency. So I know how I go from an idea into realized value by using AI in
yeah,
any organization.
yeah.
Um, I can only have confidence by probably by doing it, or kind of derived confidence by seeing other people doing it. Because there's no value in transparency if people actually not use it, right? If there is a track
Mm,
and I'm not blindfolded, if I don't start
mm,
driving, I still haven't got the value because the value is probably just going across the finish line over and over and over again, right? That's the
yeah.
analogy. So the question is, as an organization, how do you build the confidence so your teams can race not only to finish the laps, but to go faster and faster in doing so?
Can you give us a concrete example of where you've seen it in health or elsewhere, where this is actually working? That analogy now becomes a real life example.
Yeah, so there's example. I'll give an outside example. For instance, the HK industry by
Yeah.
Uniting, um, a slightly smaller organization and quite really well versed in AI. So
Mm,
they clearly know their organization, and they had an idea around like an AI buddy for elderly people, but mainly for their staff to help with some of facilitation. They incubated that or experimented with a number of AI bits and pieces. They did the more traditional proof of concept pilot and operations. And
Mm.
then, and that's kind of in the use case management process that I'm using as well. Then once it's an operation,
Yep.
they said, and this is the difference between AI and normal technology, I think, is there's a deliberate improve step because AI technology goes so fast in either the functionality or the models to use or the interfaces you can use, et cetera, that you can kind of keep refining to maximize the value.
Mm.
And that works really well, right? So, and then I go, well, most AI projects shouldn't be about AI. They actually just change programs. Because that's the real value, right? We're only racing because there's money to be made by coming first, not by just finishing the labs. So we need to work out how we make money. In that analogy, right? In the government departments, it's clearly about probably increased well-being for people that live in
Yeah,
this country.
I agreed. So just on that governance and control side, when what works well and what are the failure modes that you see in that pathway to get the right level of visibility and control over the race car?
Yeah. So I think that kind of the way I internalize the question is saying is, when do you know you have good governance or sufficient
Mm.
governance? Um, and I know that the analytical answer is to say is when we are within our risk profile, right? Because that's kind of the reason for governance to a certain extent. And I go, well, yeah, that's true, but that's not an experience. That's not something I can feel or kind of touch. I can see it analytically. So to me, um, like really good governance is almost governance that as a user or as a developer or a staff member, you almost don't see. So it's the no
Mm.
friction approach because ultimately governance is just a means to an end. It's just to make sure that we the organization, doesn't take unnecessary risks. But that's not the
Mm.
end. It's just a means to an end. An end is to use AI to create value
Yeah,
in wherever your strategy says you want to create value. That's
absolutely.
that's the reason. So
It
governance is
is.
just
It
a
is.
support process of a business process, and the business
Yeah.
process have an organizational objective. So the best
And
governance
when
is actually governance that you don't necessarily feel it's there. It's just there.
mm, senior leadership and that transparent governance, I mean, what are the levers that a senior leader has to affect change and enable artificial intelligence initiatives. And I'll tell you why it's important. I heard recently a sort of a senior banking analyst saying that was now standard questions for the board whenever doing a review of their strategy. How are they going to productively employ AI to transform their business, increase productivity, and deliver new services? And so every leader is being challenged with, I need that race car outcome, but what is it? What are the levers organizationally that they need to be thinking about most to actually make that happen?
What if I'll work it backwards? Because it's a common question and it's the right
Mm.
question to ask. And I'm trying to answer it with a non-technical answer because I think it's the non-technical pieces that will hold us back and to where the value is. So if we agree that the outcome of AI is actually nothing to do with AI, but they're business outcomes or well-being outcomes, so then the question is, what do I need to do to achieve my outcomes faster than not using AI? Because if it's not
Mm.
faster or better or more efficient or whatever the value proposition of AI, you probably go, well, I don't need it, right? So that's the first thing. So then the question is, how do I do that? Um, and the conceptual answer is, well, I need the capability to do so.
Mm.
That's the logical answer. And well, that's okay, that's conceptual. But then, whatever those capabilities are, how do I
Mm.
build them, or what's the kind of the condition so I can build them? Because as a board, you don't build them yourself. Your management team will do so, right? You just hold them to make sure that the capabilities get built. And my conclusion is in order to build or create a space so these capabilities can be built, you actually need to make sure that your staff and or your vendors or the third parties you work with trust AI. Because if you don't trust it, you will not use it. If you don't use it, you will not build the capability. If you don't have the capability, you will not derive the value, or you won't at least not maximize the value you can derive.
Mm.
And then back
And
to where we
trust is
started.
an interesting
Yeah.
word,
So the
isn't it?
question
You
then
know?
is,
Yeah.
how do you build trust in AI?
Mm.
Well, in order to build trust in AI, you need to have the confidence to use it.
Mm.
Because if you have the confidence to use it, then you use it a lot on an organizational level, right? So if you have the confidence to use it as an organization, then therefore you use it a lot. If you use it a lot, therefore you trust it a lot. If you trust it a lot, you have an increased
It's a,
capability.
but you're presenting a circular argument. God, to have confidence, I need to have trust. To have trust, you need to be confident about using it. So there's a bit of circular kind of argument there because I thought you'd go with to build trust, you need to have reliability. You know, I need the machine to be able to produce results, which won't get me in the newspaper for having kind of, promoted some kind of weird sort of, dictatorship somewhere or do something weird.
But I agree, it is a loop.
Yeah.
Trust is either a
Yeah.
positive or a negative loop. So you need to realize that it is a loop. It has self-reinforcing mechanisms, either negative or
Yeah.
positive. So you can build
Yeah.
trust or increase or decrease trust by understanding what the loop is and how to impact
Mhm.
it. Because I agree. So if you go from trust, therefore confidence, we know that transparency becomes before confidence,
Mhm.
right? So if you don't have transparency, you don't have confidence. If you have done confidence, you don't not using it a lot. If you're not using it, you don't have the capability to maximize AI. Therefore, you won't achieve your
Mhm.
outcomes. But then
Yeah.
the trust loop is saying is how do I build a positive trust loop, not a negative trust loop? You can
Yeah. Well, and
only.
let me
Mhm.
add in there the creation of guide rails as well, because we've just seen in the US a really big discussion about major vendors discussing and challenging the guide rails or the desire to take guide rails away from them, the control of the guide rails. So that must be an important part of that trust equation as well. Having
It is.
autonomous weapons and mass surveillance are probably guide rails in Australia we would consider to be necessary for AI. And I'm sure at a health
No,
level,
no,
there
no.
are plenty
I
more.
fully agree. So I
Mm,
think if you don't have the, so to me, that comes back to confidence of use. So if you have a low level of confidence of use, but you are using it, if you get
yep.
results that didn't fit within your frame of what you were expecting, which is the
Mm,
example you used, therefore your confidence will be lower because you have a negative experience. If you're using it and you have a positive experience and you have derived value and not the boom, not gloom pieces, you probably your
mm,
confidence increased.
mm,
So the short answer, and it's more complex than that, but the short answer is that if you can give transparency to your teams, if you can show teams that some other teams are using it and you have lots of people using it with a
yep.
positive experience, then the positive
Mm.
experience will lead to more use. More
So,
use will lead to more outcomes.
so does that mean lots of smaller programs to start implementing, AI in manageable chunks is a good strategy for starting to consume and
Right. So,
transform?
yeah. So then the question is, how do you do that?
Mm,
I think partly the answer is, and we could talk about it for 2 hours, probably how you do that, right? There's a whole implementation plan. But I think
yeah.
one of the things I would suggest is that experimentation, so exploration and experimentation, I'd say should be as close to the owner of the problem or the idea. So
Mm,
ideally, all
mm,
staff with ideas should be able to explore and experiment. That's not always
yeah.
possible because you might not have the guardrails and the technical systems to do so. But from a design
Yeah.
principle, I think that's where you want to push it. Not central, but as very decentral.
Yeah. And it raises fabulous questions about large, monolithic, opaque, vendor-based solve the world's problem solutions versus more in, organically grown, transparent, visible controls and guide rails from building these sort of smaller, sort of, but emerging and trust building sort of engagements.
Exactly. So, right. So there's questions
Mm,
around, well, is it narrow AI or operational AI versus kind of AGI style
yeah.
thinking, right? And not so much the
Yeah.
models. It gives you questions around, are there enterprise AI control systems on an enterprise level, so across your platforms and your stacks, not within your platforms and your stacks, right?
Mm,
A lot of departments and organizations will have hundreds of applications and probably
yeah.
large platforms, right? A Salesforce and an Oracle and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or an AWS environment, a Microsoft environment, a Google environment, and some other environment.
Mm,
So the question
mm,
is, we can build controls on an application level, on a platform level, or wherever you want to architect your way out of it. But could you design, and there isn't that software starting to become on the market, where there's enterprise controls on an AI level, right? For
Yeah.
instance, I would like to control agent behavior, whatever that means, and we can break it down. If we could truly control it on an enterprise level, I might not need to build in the controls on a platform level or an application level. If I have that, I can
Mm.
push experimentation a lot closer to the end user.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, Johan. And I can see the desire. I can imagine that a government agency, especially with the policies, the audit responsibilities, the transparency, and the a lot of the obligations which won't go away, the legislative obligations, will probably be highly attracted to the ability to start to set those enterprise policies and those rules so that they're consistently applied across all systems that are developed. So that's definitely seems like a real strong growth area and very valuable.
As well as
Uh,
if you have that in place, you can use it to have efficiency gains, right?
yeah.
So you can start going, well, I know this request with this agent or person, but I'm not going to route it to this model. I'm going to route it to that model because that's a more efficient way of using tokens. Or you might go, this agent is trying to do it this way, but I'm actually going to point it that way. Or there's
Mm,
lots of efficiency gains you can do outside of more of a model
there
gateway, right?
is.
This is a very advanced model gateway, if you will.
Oh, no, I can see that. And I'd see that tension between enterprise level thinking and, to your point, the value of pushing it as close as possible to the front line of where those transactions or those interactions are happening.
Yeah, yeah, no,
And
exactly.
that,
But I think if
mm,
you can design your controls in a transparent way on an enterprise level,
mhm,
then that should enable you to have experimentation kind of by end users almost, right? Maybe you don't even want your
yeah,
staff to do it. You might want your clients to do it. And just
yeah,
imagine that,
yeah,
because with vibe coding and other things, the client can just talk to what the client wants to see, and it builds it almost like on the spot. So, right, why do you need
yeah,
business analysts? I mean, you do, but in that example, you could question that, right? The role of
yeah.
analysis and kind of that type of thing. Um, so if you so yeah, you can see a whole
I can
different
totally see
world
that.
where controls helps you to actually derive outcomes because it's transparent and designed at the right level, not deep down in
Yes.
the organizations, which is kind of where we started the conversation on
No, and I'm
controls.
a huge fan of that, but it does imply, and I go for the strategic implications of that conversation to say that means it needs to be some kind of emergent federated structure where I
Yes.
can articulate that sort of, enterprise level controls, but that ability to push the capabilities and the tools out as close as possible to where interactions are happening. And to your point, I'm working with a federal agency that runs a very extensive and complicated business network. It has a lot of partners that are, orchestrating their own businesses and trying to,
Yeah.
integrate with the agency to be able to create the outcomes that the agency seeks, but in a much more, marketplace kind of environment. And in that world where we start to couple sort of, the microservices as ingredients that could be matched with AI tools to be able to, to blend your own, cook your own particular service offerings within the agency's kind of parameters. Great use cases which are made possible through data and the tools to be able to articulate them.
Yeah, I think that's a whole
If it,
topic for a different podcast on how you would do that, right? Because you go
that's
into,
right.
can we design agents as a
Yeah,
service, which I'm challenging a lot
yeah,
of software providers. Kind of like, I don't want to build agents. Why don't you build
yeah.
an agent once for the 100 clients and I'll just consume it as a service? Well,
Yes,
whatever that means. Can I
yes,
pick it from a marketplace? But I don't want to buy it. I want
yes.
to lease it off you,
Yeah,
et cetera,
yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a whole different topic.
Ridge talk. This is our first, so and we're going to just scratch the surface. And I really like the race car analogy, and we're going to keep coming back to that one because we want all that power and the accuracy of steering and the wonderful cornering that our race car is going to give us. But we want to be able to do that in a way that doesn't end us up back in the pits too quickly. Hey, if you're on wrapping this up, if you could say take one thing from this conversation that you think is really important, what would it be?
So just to summarize almost like the whole conversation, I think what we're saying is,
Mm,
or what I'm trying to say is transparency first, confidence second, focus
yeah,
on building trust in AI as a concept, and none of these things are technology based. So
excellent.
therefore, you have the capabilities to actually get better outcomes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ryan. great conversation.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Okay. See you again soon.